Hello, everybody, and welcome to our bonus webinar, is the best way I can describe this. So, bonus for the ENABL community. So we've got the pleasure of sitting down, standing up, depending on however you're all comfortable, with Nick Kirk, our Group Chief Executive for PageGroup. So my boss's boss's boss, so no pressure on me. And Baroness Ruby McGregor-Smith, a member of the House of Lords, a former FTSE 250 CEO and Portfolio Ned. So the main topics of discussion will be around how to maximize your opportunities to develop your executive and non-executive career, and also discuss progress around DE&I that both have seen in the boardrooms and beyond. It's very much designed to be an open discussion. So both Ruby and Nick have kindly requested that you use the Q&A option on the webinar, that you are open with the questions that you have. We have got some questions that we're going to go through, but they were really keen to hear from the community and address issues that you may or may wanted to discuss. So without further ado, first question for you, Ruby, and I'll be honest, it's quite a big one. So, you know, in 2007, you were apparently the only female FTSE 250 CEO. Now, what was that like? Sorry, Ruby, you're on mute.
Apologies. It came as a bit of a surprise. I was sort of the first Asian female, really. I didn't really know that until the media told me. And I found all of that, the attention, pretty unhelpful, to be fair, because, you know, I was only running an outsourcing group and I didn't see what the big deal was. But apparently it was quite a big moment. I found it, I kept thinking it was actually quite a distraction away from what I was doing in terms of growing my group. Because I didn't want people saying, oh, there's Ruby McGregor-Smith, she's Asian and she's the first person to get this FTSE role. I just want to say it's Ruby McGregor-Smith who runs a group, you know, who runs my team. But that wasn't the way it was going to be. And I think when I reflect back on it, I think I then said, okay, what it makes you realise is that you've got to use that platform to make sure that you can support others in your position. And I'm really passionate about making sure from a D&I perspective, and I always have been, including when I was at Ned on the page board, of making sure that we really think about D&I as something that is sort of embedded in every organisation, so that people like me don't have to walk around boardrooms thinking, why does nobody else look like me or think like me? It would be great if we could have a wider set of thinking around many issues. And it is a bit lonely, I think, would be my other observation. These jobs are lonely anyway. I'm sure Nick will tell you that too. They're lonely roles when you get these roles, and made probably lonelier when you realise that there's not an easy peer group to find that you can necessarily relate to.
Brilliant, thank you. And as a follow-up to that then, so what progress have you seen in listed businesses during when you began there and now?
Well, it's certainly improving, but it's slow. There's still only a relatively small number of female CEOs because many women I know don't necessarily go down the operational routes through in business and take huge P&L responsibility early on. You get them more in more functional roles, which you know, I very much try and encourage everyone to take up exec roles more and more, because then I think you'll get a better pipeline. It's getting a little bit better, but do I think there's been enough progress? No, because until it's 50-50, gender parities, until you've got parity on gender and on race, my view is no, it's not good enough. At the moment, we're talking about closing the gender pay gap in about 30 odd years, which seems a bit ridiculous in its own right. So slow progress, but it's better than 2007 when it was a complete shock. At least now at least now I think people don't think about it as much, but the stats don't bear out that we've made great progress.
Amazing, thank you. And so for Nick, yourself, you know, no people wouldn't believe it, but as somebody who's been in recruitment for 30 years and in this industry, what would you say have been the biggest changes over that time, particularly looking through D&I as the lens?
Right, okay, yeah, 30 years, thank you. I mean, it's funny to think back to 1995 when I joined, because I mean, it wasn't until I think 2006 that for instance, the Age Discrimination Act came in. So for the first 11 years, it was a very normal part of taking a job brief to say, what age profile are you looking for? And then we'd run an advert that said 25 to 30 or 30 to 40 or whatever. And that was the norm. I mean, it wasn't considered strange at all. And actually, if anything, when the Age Discrimination Act came in, I think there was a real sense amongst recruiters, which is, oh, God, we're going to get everybody applying now, aren't we? And kind of like, yeah, that's kind of the point, isn't it? So, I mean, it was just very, very different times. And, you know, I think as a result, you could see why there was so much kind of untapped talent as a result, because there was I suppose you'd call it freedom or opportunity to be very specific on your brief and interview against that with a very fixed view, therefore immediately discriminating against a group of the population, in my example there, around age. So, yeah, I mean, it's changed tremendously. If anything, now we're kind of reaping some of that from a negative perspective in the pipeline that you see at more senior levels. But I think that, you know, if you judge businesses around intent, then moving to, well, awareness, moving to intent, moving to action, I think that we've come a long way on the first two and still probably got a bit of a journey to go on the final one, the action one. I think the awareness is a lot better. The intention's certainly a lot better, but maybe still some gap there around action.
Okay, so linking that to action then, can you share any specific, I suppose, a success story or program that perhaps worked at PageGroup that helped advance representation?
I mean, Ruby said it before. I mean, she was on our board for a long time, and actually, I did just want to pick up on one thing she said in one of her first answers. This element of being lonely, but also in terms of maybe taking control of your own career, whether that's in terms of a view of moving into a more senior exec role or looking at a portfolio career and wanting to advance in that area. I mean, I use the phrase shameless networking. And I do think that there has to be an element of that. Someone said to me the other day, oh, I'm the type of person who walks into, they weren't talking about me, they were talking about themselves. I'm the type of person who walks into a room and I know the person I want to talk to, but they're already surrounded by other people. And I look across and I'm thinking, I'll go over when they're not surrounded by people. And I keep looking over and they're still surrounded by people. And then I look over 40 minutes later and they've left and I've missed my chance. And I just think that life is, you know, about kind of getting comfortable with that sense of feeling uncomfortable around networking. I remember when I first got this job, I was very conscious of the fact that I really only knew one CEO particularly well, and that was the CEO I was taking over from. And so I went out of my way, and kindly Ruby was one of the ex-CEOs that offered some of her time to sit down and talk to me. But you go out and you ask people to help you. You ask them for their support. And I think what I've found is that certainly with the more senior people are, the more willing they are to give you an hour of their time and say, yeah, God, what a great idea you've had there. I wish I'd done that at the start of my CEO career and actually reached out and kind of had these conversations, etc. So I think, you know, there are ways of tackling this loneliness and tackling this sense of, I want to get there, but I don't know how. But you do have to adopt an approach of, as I call it, shameless networking, which is, it is uncomfortable at times, but generally, you know, once you start doing it and the more you do it, you will get some positive response. Going back to your question, which was around things that we've done. I mean, Ruby was on our board back in around about 2012, when I think it was that was probably the Hampton-Alexander report around about that time. And that was when we started to look specifically at gender as one of the lenses of diversity. And we were looking at our own organisation, and it was pretty ugly. I mean, so within our leadership structure at that point, we had 17% female representation. And there were many, many reasons as to why, which we might go on to a bit later on. But, you know, through being very intentional about that, I mean, we're an organically grown company. So what we weren't ever going to do was therefore go out and hire 30 senior females. We had to address it internally and grow the female population that existed at a 50-50 level at entry. But then by the time it got to leadership was down to 17. You know, and I'm proud to say through the work of some of the people on this call and more broadly is we ended last year at 45%. So, you know, that's an 11-year journey to get to that point, and our target is 50% by 2030, and I'm hopeful we'll get there before then. But, you know, that's definitely a program whereby having the focus, having the intent, but coming back to what I said earlier, having that sense of action and changing things to get the outcome that you want, it can be done.
Amazing, thank you. And so, sorry, Ruby, as we mentioned, you were on the board with Paige. Does the above resonate? Oh, sorry, what Nick's just spoken about in terms of priorities and you?
Yeah, no, completely. I mean, when I joined the board of Page, I was the only female on the board, and it was very different to the organisation it is today. And I remember having, in the early days, some quite big conversations with the then chief exec about, well, where are all the senior women? You know, why is representation so low? What are we going to do about flex? What are we going to do around supporting women through their careers? And a lot of those conversations were really well received, because it was clear that more needed to be done, which was good. So there was real recognition that more needed to be done. And then when we launched Women at Page, that was sort of the beginning of us really trying to put something together that was going to resonate with women within the organisation. But also we had to recognise very much that if you want to keep really good talent, you've got to support really good talent through its career, as we know. So I think, you know, in the early days, it was very much, okay, around what do we need to do, which then moved to, okay, well, what actions do we need to take? And certainly I think representation today at Page compared to 2007 is fundamentally different. So again, of course, more will happen. Of course, it will continue to happen through the pipeline of individuals within the organisation. But actually, when I look back to what I joined to what Page is today, it's pretty different. It's very, very, very different, which is, and that's really positive, I think, for the organisation.
Amazing, thank you. And I don't want to get too topical given everything that's happening, but I was really keen, and for the audiences, to understand what were the differences that you saw in the environment between your political career and then the corporate career, or was it not that dissimilar?
I think, you know, it's a real privilege to be in somewhere like the House of Lords, but I certainly managed to join at a somewhat chaotic time. I mean, you know, give me challenges in my corporate career, but from leaving the European Union to a pandemic wasn't quite the plan, with some real volatility around different elements of different political parties as well on all sides. When you look at all the challenges that have come out, and also I think on the back of, you know, post, you know, when I look back and think, good grief, they've been through a financial crisis. There's been a change of government from 2010. The challenges that come with that, with periods of austerity through to where everything is today, it's been really bumpy. But what's interesting to me is the media portrayal of all of that. Is I kind of, it's really interesting. You know, I sit in the House of Lords and I'll sit in Parliament on a session of something, and then I'll read the coverage and wonder if I'm actually in the same place. You know, I'm almost like, it's actually pretty different. You know, it's a lot of teamwork, which people don't necessarily see. There has to be to put any legislation through governments. It's not always easy, but it's certainly better than I think it tends to be portrayed, particularly in the current environment where it just I don't want to read the media. I don't see the point. I'm almost like, what drama is it today? And that's a real shame, because there's a huge amount of number of people and the amount of work that happens within the UK Parliament, but also within the civil service, that is absolutely exceptional to keep things going well. But that tends to get overlaid with politics, which I always find a bit of a shame. But no, I found it it's very different. It's been eye-opening. I don't know if I'd recommend it to everybody, but I mean, I've always loved public policy. So for me, I have a real love of what can we do to influence public policy that means we can grow a better economy in the UK. So I find it really fascinating. It isn't for everyone, though.
Okay, thank you for sharing. So something that I think, I suppose, a lot of our community are aspirant NEDs. So would you mind just sharing a little bit about your journey in becoming an NED, and what advice would you give aspirant NEDs?
So I decided to do my first NED when I was a CEO because I wanted to understand what it was like to play a different role on a board. And it is very different. You know, you are there to sort of offer guidance and advice. Management teams don't always listen, which is, by the way, okay. You hope that they reflect and that maybe some of it goes in. But, you know, I was one of those management teams once, so I know exactly what it's like. It's really interesting because I think what a NED role gives you is a different perspective on another organisation in maybe a related or a different sector, with different positives and challenges through that organisation. And so I think actually it's really important to do the following. It's to choose things that you think you're going to enjoy. You don't need to go too far away from your current sector to something wholly different. You've got to think about how you can use your skill base to support another organisation. It doesn't have to be FTSE. There's a world of private equity. There's a world of assets out there. There's a whole range of things you can do, down to going, you know, and don't rule out the experience you can gain just from supporting smaller organisations as well. Not necessarily public, private, could be public sector, different field. There's a whole range. But the most important thing for me is that you find something you do that you can enjoy and you're prepared to give the time to, and you're prepared to learn from. It's certainly quite a big learning curve when you first do it. And the bigger you go, the more work it is. So you've got to think very clearly if you've got an exec role about what time you can really give up to support another organisation, because although they may say to you, well, it's only X amount of time, that's great until there's an emergency. I recall when I joined the Page board, it was meant to be quite low levels of work, and then we had a potential takeover offer in the that was in the public domain. I spent quite a few nights on that, you know, just having to look at that, and that wasn't something I was necessarily expecting, and having to work out how I could manage that alone was you know, it was interesting, and it was interesting to go through it, but there's quite a lot of pressure when you're doing that, and you've got to think very clearly about how you can continue to do your day job. But but I do think it's important to do things that you think you can add value to. Don't go outside your comfort zone, but don't go completely outside your comfort zone for the first one. And the most important thing is the first one you do is successful, because you need success. What you don't want to do is get too burnt on the first time you try and do it. I'm sure
Amazing.
Nick can add more, being the recruiter compared to me.
Well, thank you for the segue. I was going to ask Nick, is from the viewpoint of CEO currently, you know, what do you see as the major differences between that executive and then non-executive leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I've not been a non-exec, and interestingly, at this stage, I don't have any burning ambition to do it either. But that may change in the future. So I suppose coming at the question, I'd maybe be thinking a little bit about the non-execs that have stood out for me, that I've worked with over my time at Page. And you know, I'm not just saying it because she's on the call, but I mean, Ruby would be one of them. I mean, she made the time to understand our organisation. You know, it's not particularly helpful to find a non-exec coming in and making pretty bold statements early doors without asking any questions to understand the organisation that advice is applying to, because it may be that you're coming from a background where things are very different to the company that you're now on the board of. So, you know, take some time to listen, to understand the organisation. And you know, most organizations are very keen to kind of induct you and bring you in and spend time with you and get you into the office and get you, you know, in our organization, it would be listening to calls, actually listening to consultants, speaking to people and speaking to consultants. You know, don't just believe the leadership. Go talk to the people that are on the front line and start to understand the organization. So you bring that back into the boardroom. And I think I also go back to that process I talked about that I went through a year ago when I first became a CEO, of actually going out and speaking to other CEOs to understand how they manage their boards. And what I took away from that was, certainly from a PLC perspective like ours, is this sense that you're paying in the region of about £500,000 in fees to have this board. Therefore, they're the home team. Use them. You know, in a way, it's kind of £500,000 of free management consultancy, albeit it's not free, but you get my point. Is that they're management consultants, they're bright, they've had very successful careers, they are there to listen, they understand your business better in theory than any management consultancy will that come in for a 3-month period and then go out again. And they're going to be there through whatever recommendation they're giving you or input they're giving you to actually see how it works out. Not like a management consultancy that will come in and give you advice and disappear. So I do think that it's, from my perspective, it's kind of a two-way thing, which is that I want to create a relationship with my main board where I can get the best out of them. And through that, you have to therefore open yourself up, show them the inside workings of the machine, and they have to be respectful when they're given that level of access, to not either kind of point things out and go, oh, I knew that wasn't right, or I knew that wasn't right, because that then throws the shutters back up again. What you want is that you can open up the machine and go, look, I'm concerned that this bit could run better or this bit could run better, without blame. That then your non-execs can look at it and go, yeah, I get that. Yeah, I've got some experience there. We had that in my company that didn't run well. Let's share some ideas. And I think that, to me, is how the relationship between exec and non-exec works really well. And if you're lucky, that's what you get.
Amazing. I must admit, part of that appeals very much to the Yorkshireman in me, which is you're paying for it, so you may as well use it. Make the most of it. To that, if you're looking at, or yeah, I know that you've not been a Ned yourself, Nick, but if you're going to encourage people to build out some of that skill set in their executive careers, what would you suggest it's worth them focusing on to enable them to be successful as that Ned?
I think innately, some people, I mean, Ruby said it in her answer, which is that I think for your first Ned role, it does probably help that you're finding something that is some way linked to some experience you've had. So broadly business services, or broadly technology, or broadly whatever it may be, so that you are bringing some exec experience into this organization's boardroom that you've had. Recognizing as you step in that you're not an exec anymore, and that's a really important definition to be clear with yourself on early. I was having a lunch today with one of our Neds, and he was saying, so Page is his first Ned role, and he said that that's still something that he's wrestling with when he comes to main board meetings, which is not overstepping the line and thinking that maybe he has done once or twice, which he probably has, but then actually, you know, asking for permission rather than forgiveness, or forgiveness rather than permission. And just chatting to him over lunch today is that it's definitely coming from a good place. But, you know, you do have to remember that you don't run the business, and you're not the CIO of that business or the CFO. You're the CIO, CFO of another organization. I think, though, that, you know, I said it in one of my earlier answers, I think that, you know, if you're going to get that first role, which will be the hardest one you're looking for, every Ned I speak to says the first one's the most difficult one to get, is that just making sure that in the process of getting there, you are just trying to kind of learn off others. You know, I think anyone who's attending this call today is committed to that sense of wanting to know more and learn from someone like Ruby, who's been a successful Ned and is a successful Ned. And I think that if you are picking things up, then that's just going to help you when you do land that first role, because then there is the sense of sitting in your first main board meeting and making your first point to that main board, and you've got the CFO and the CEO in the room as well. Then it needs to land. You know, you can't start weak and then go down from there. So, you know, it's quite a big moment stepping into that environment, and therefore, you know, coming in with a question is better than coming in with a statement.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that. So pivoting a little bit, so Ruby, Dosanjh, you famously wrote that the time to act is now, when you in your Race in the Workplace report, and you've already referenced that you don't think we're necessarily as far as we think we should be. What do you think are the major bottlenecks for diverse talent in organizations?
I think there's a number of things, isn't there? If you take a look at some of the challenges, I think for many individuals from a more diverse background, they don't always apply for promotions. I don't think they're going to get it because they don't see any role models. There's a whole point about what you see you can't be. You know, is that the case or not? I personally ignored all that and just got on with it with my career. But for many, you kind of want to feel comfortable that organizations are really, really serious about diversity and inclusion because you can see people that represent people like you. And for me, that was always the really interesting thing, was that when I did my race review, I was pretty horrified by the stats. I thought things had changed a bit, but honestly, they're pretty hopeless in many organizations. So few senior people from a more diverse background. I was pretty depressed. I thought things had changed a lot, but not enough. So I think there's a huge piece for me around sponsoring, you know, your more diverse talent, because they don't necessarily have the networks that others do. They don't necessarily know how to apply for those promotions. They may not feel the most confident about doing so, and they may not feel they fit. So there's a huge amount that can be done to support them, to really help them become more successful. There's a piece to me about pay gap reporting, because pay gap reporting tells you where you've got the challenges. You know, data is we should always start with data. There's lots of conversations around all of this. But if you start with data, A, you know where you are, but B, you can then decide what you're going to do about it. You need a senior leadership team of any organization to be absolutely committed to making sure that while they run the organization, one of their legacy pieces they leave, it's going to be better when they left than when they first started. And it's a big piece of aspiration for me around management teams. So what do you really want to achieve while you're doing your roles as a management team? Because if you're not prepared to move the dial on this, then I'm kind of going, yeah, well, okay, you can grow a company, you can grow profits, you can do this, you can do that, you can do all these great things for shareholders, but kind of do something really brilliant for the people, which is create an even more inclusive organization than the one you started with. And we can all do more on that. We know that. And then my final observation on it is that sort of how do organizations really support the individual, but how does the individual really support themselves? You know, whether it is more training, more support on looking at different roles, being encouraged to do management roles, being encouraged to say, yeah, of course you can. I remember many years ago saying to Nick, I think you could maybe think about being a CEO, Nick. You know, those conversations don't happen enough in organizations about showing people where their potential can be. And the reason I say that is that I never thought I could be a CEO till someone actually said to me, do you know what? You really should go for that. It never would have occurred to me that it was something I could go for until someone actually gave me, I had two CEOs really supporting me through to get to that level. And we all need that. No one just does it magically. No one just appears and you go, oh my God, that person's so amazing, they became chief executive, or they're running a major part of an organization. They've been supported all the way through. And it's that sort of teamwork support that I think everyone should be able to rely on in an organization that should encourage more diverse talent. And it means that you've really got to support the more diverse talent until the numbers start to even out, because they're still not good enough.
Brilliant, thank you. And it's interesting that next week we've got another webinar, but around building that career confidence, because it's so critical for people to develop, even to executive or director level, to have that belief. And without the validation of senior individuals, sometimes you don't necessarily have that faith in yourself.
You know, the big thing for me about when you apply for new roles or you apply for promotions, the number of recruiters, not necessarily Page, who still say previous experience needed of the following. Well, if you've never done it, how can you show you've got the experience? How are you going to get through to a shortlist? How are you going to sit in front of a group of people who are interviewing you where they understand more about more diverse talent? You know, it's not easy. I can tell you that from, you know, the number of interviews I've done where everyone who's interviewing me, let's just say, has got an incredibly different background and are all male. to me, trying to get your head around how you're going to be successful with a group of people that are nothing like you is actually quite difficult. So it's all those things you need to do to really support people on making sure they can be successful that I think matters.
Thank you. I think recruitment is certainly one of the most risk-averse things that people go through. And to that end, Nick, what do you believe are the areas that still require attention when it comes to investment in DE&I?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, Ruby's touched on it a little bit there, which is that I think organisations, the more that they're looking first and foremost at experience rather than potential, the more you're going to end up with more of what you've already got. And I think to break the cycle, you need to start interviewing against potential rather than, as I say, just experience, because otherwise you're just moving the same people around different jobs at the same level, and you're waiting for time and history to catch up. And I don't think anyone's patient enough to wait another 10 or 20 years. And some organisations are really up for that conversation and embrace it when you talk to them about it. And others are quite fearful of it. And I understand why. I don't say that, you know, with a sense of everybody gets it straight away. Why don't they? Because what are they afraid of? What they're afraid of is that they promote someone based on potential and they lose all the experience. And therefore, you know, there's some risk in doing that. I think also, you know, for me, when you're looking to promote either internally or fill a role externally against internal candidates, the challenge I always say when I'm speaking to customers is it is about finding the right candidate, whatever that is, whatever right is for you. That is the aim of this process. The best candidate should get the job. But what is important is that you've got diversity in the choice, in the shortlist. If you end up with a shortlist that is all white men, well, there's only one outcome, of course there is. So, you know, you have to kind of challenge your recruiter, challenge yourself to make sure the diversity is there in the shortlist that you're assessing, and then allow the best candidate to come through. But think about what it is that you're looking for. Is it, as I said before, just someone who can do the job now, or someone who's got the potential to step into a role that's going to be faced with loads of change over the next 5 years? Therefore, the skill set that you need more than anything isn't the experience of having done it before, because it's changing. Therefore, that experience might actually be a hindrance. What you need is a behavioural set that allows you to be really agile and flexible and think quickly and plan well and future view. And if those are the behaviours that are going to be more important than the current experience, well, therefore that candidate could come from a really different part of the organisation or externally. So I think it's just about being quite open-minded, but coming from that point that Ruby said before, which is that if you're just going to interview based on experience, all you're going to get is the same pool of people again and again. And you have to try and open your mind to that word potential and think about, you know, how rapidly business is changing and how important, therefore, agility in a skill set is, and whether the people that you're hiring could actually adapt through having that potential, that ability to change, because they've shown it throughout their career.
Amazing. I think from my side, unfortunately for my sins, I always link most things back to football. And in my view, that's almost the old adage of don't run to where the ball is, run to where it's going to go. And that's the same with organizations needing to be agile. Look at where the talent will go and what you're going to need moving forward. Thank you for sharing that. And well, look, I'm conscious that we were going to talk a little bit about the future, but I think that we've answered some of the things that we were looking at before. But I wanted to get your takeaway in terms of, you know, we touched on it before, 24-hour news cycle, the race to capture our eyeballs means that we don't always see the most positive representations of business or general news, or certainly not politics at the moment. But when looking at the future, and this is a question for both of you, we'll start with you, Ruby, what excites you most about how and where the workforce is going and the progress that we've made?
So I'm really excited actually about what can happen in the future, and I'll explain why. I think we, particularly if I take a look at, say, UK markets alone, but actually global markets, I think we're going to come out of this sort of technical recession here. The global economy is sort of up and down, but there's great opportunity in so many markets. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. But I think many organisations need to change and get their heads around what some of the obstacles might be. I'm hugely excited about generative AI. I think AI is a good thing. Of course, everyone's going to talk to on boards about how you've got to control it and all the usual. Well, once you're through all that, I think we should sort of really embrace what it can do for organisations and get ahead and really understand. I mean, I look at some of the technology out today compared to when even I started as CEO. Oh my goodness me, it's fantastic, isn't it? I mean, I didn't even have what? I think I only just got a BlackBerry or something ridiculous, you know. I look at what an iPhone does today. I remember, you know, when I got my first one, it certainly didn't do what it does today. And you just look at the changes in the way we run businesses compared to even 10, 15 years ago. Well, that's going to escalate even more. I say that's exciting. Others may say it's challenging. For me, that's really exciting. A lot of my work is in the area of decarbonisation and net zero. So I'm hugely excited about all the opportunities to do that. Certainly in some of my old industries. But I also, as well, think that the workplace is different. Thank goodness hybrid is normal. I mean, really? I couldn't believe that people ever used to go in 5 days a week to anywhere. I mean, I ran an outsourcer, but it was all, you know, 70,000 people based all around the country. We couldn't be in one place with them all. So we were everywhere. So I've always been hybrid since I first got involved in my first industry. I can't comprehend people went to the same place every day. I really genuinely couldn't. And the moment you got technology, and even 15 years ago, you could be hybrid. So I'm delighted that the one good thing that came out of that ridiculous pandemic was actually this huge move on technology, because I think what it really does, and why hybrid really matters to me, is I think particularly for those that need flexibility in their roles. And I think a lot about women, and actually guys as well, parents, I think of as well, how great that you don't have to be in every single minute of every day when you've got a lot going on as well outside work. I think that whole work-life balance piece is actually better. I know some will argue the opposite. I say long term it's better and it should be embraced. And then finally, I'll say I've always been entrepreneurial. I see opportunity out of change and more challenging times, and it's an opportunity to rethink about how we do things differently every year. So I'm one of those genuinely quite excited people about the future. And yes, there's lots of issues and lots of challenges globally, but I think you've got to look for the opportunities and all of that and sort of steer organisations forward to do that.
Amazing, thank you. And Nick, what excites you most?
Yeah, that was an excellent answer, wasn't it? That covered a lot of the good stuff. Well, maybe a bit of a nod to a group that I think often get perhaps a bit of a rough deal, which is the workforce that we have, that's, well, the generation we have coming into the workplace and the generation that's come into the workplace over the last 5 years. There's often some commentary there that's negative about them, you know, the words, you know, snowflake generation, all of this. And I personally, I just don't buy it. You know, what I really like about the generation we have in the workplace that's probably sub 28, sub 30, and the ones that are coming in now, is that they've got a few characteristics that I've always really liked anyway, and probably maybe I had one or two of these, but it was a bit unusual to have them, which is that firstly, I think they have a healthy disrespect for authority. Not just a disrespect for authority, which isn't great, but a healthy disrespect. And what do I mean by that? They take the view that respect is earned, you know, so they're not just going to respect you because you have a big title or you've been here a long time. You know, they want to see some evidence. They want you to prove yourself. And I think that's a good thing. I also think that they tend to talk to the person and not the title. And I think that's a really good thing as well. I get more people, you know, since I've got this job and I've got the title, there's definitely a sense of age groups that are similar to mine that do talk to you based on, oh, you're the CEO, and then talk to you as a CEO, as opposed to talking to you as Nick Kirk, who works for PageGroup. I tend to find with employees that I have in the 20s, and when I go out to market, they ignore your title completely. And I love that. I love that. I think that's a way better way of doing business than this sense of kind of respect through hierarchy. I think it's respect through action, respect through results. So yeah, I'd probably just give a big up to that generation that I think at times gets, you know, a bit of a kind of a poor deal from the media, and I see them in a slightly different light.
Thanks for that, Nick. I couldn't agree with you more. I'm a bit too old to claim one, but I'm a proud snowflake. Yeah, I'm like, yeah, throw that badge at me. I'll wear it with pride. Thank you. But really do agree with you both there. There's a lot to be excited about. I think that some people, it's always easy to see the bad side of stuff, isn't it? But there's always opportunity, and no matter what challenge comes ahead. So from my side, thank you very much for your time with these questions. And as we said at the beginning of the beginning of the conversation, it was about getting the community questions. So I'll ask Jo to re-enter the meeting because she'll be talking through some of the questions that have come from the audience. So welcome back, Jo, our chair of ENABL.
Thank you. That was really great and really insightful. So thank you both, Ruby and Nick, for that. We've got quite a few questions to get through, so let's try and do our best. But starting with one which was sent earlier, what do you think needs to be done to stop interest waning around the DE&I agenda in the boardroom? Because we've had a lot of press around that. That, you know, CEOs are now speaking out that it's not important or not high priority for them. So what do you think needs to be done so we keep that agenda alive? Nick, actually, do you want to start?
Okay. Wow. I wasn't aware. I mean, I'm sure that comes from a report somewhere, but I can only talk about my own organisation. And, you know, I think if it started out back in 2012 as a conversation about agenda, then today it's a very much more diverse conversation around the different strands of diversity and moving on from diversity and discussions about inclusion. I think that actually there's a lot of success to celebrate. I mean, as I said to you earlier, I mean, I think it was the Davis Review initially, then it was the Hampton Alexander, now it's the FTSE Women Leaders Review. And actually, if you read those papers, then rightly so, there's quite a lot of congratulations that are going on from both the committees, but also the corporates and the results that have been achieved. They're significant. And more recently, the Parker Review, that was published, I think, earlier this week, the second or third review. And again, a lot of success that should be acknowledged. But still, you know, plenty to do. I mean, you know, I was in India about 3 weeks ago, and our managing director for our Mumbai office, who's very aspirational, really high quality individual, said to me, we're a global organization in 37 countries. I said, yeah, that's right. And he said, yeah, I look at the board and what I see is white Europeans. And he said, we don't have a very global board for a global organization. And I mean, he's quite a young guy, he's only early 30s. And so going back to that healthy disrespect for authority, that challenge, I was like, yeah, you're right. And so there's still plenty to do. You know, I kind of at some stage look at what we've achieved and go, God, we've got great gender diversity. But then there's other areas where we're still really lagging behind. So I don't know, I probably can't speak, well, I certainly can't speak for all CEOs and what's going on in every boardroom, but for whoever asked the question, I can certainly reassure you from the CEOs I've spoken to and the conversations that go on in the board that I'm involved in, I don't see any tailing off at all. And certainly when, I mean, Jo, I know you're here to ask questions rather than answer them, but, you know, Jo's part of our DE&I engagement team. They work with many customers that we have that are trying to address shortfalls that they have in their business around various strands of diversity, whichever one it may be. And Jo and her team go in and speak to them about things they could do to actually get results, so actions that will deliver results. And I think those conversations are only increasing, they're not diminishing. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure the question comes from an article or maybe some feedback from certain CEOs. It's just not my experience.
Thank you. The next question I'm going to propose to Ruby, actually. So someone has actually applied for a NED role previously and received not very helpful feedback from the recruiter on why they've been unsuccessful. So they wanted to know, is it appropriate to actually reach out to the chair and get some feedback directly? What's your thoughts on that? How would that be perceived?
I think it's a good idea. If you want feedback, you should always be able to get feedback if the recruiters aren't giving you any feedback that's helpful. And I have to say, it is a bit hit and miss with recruiters about whether you do get good feedback at that level for NED roles. I think it's absolutely fine too. I've certainly been asked before to give feedback on this to individuals, and I'm really happy to. I don't see what the big deal is. I really don't. So yes, I would, because what you're trying to do, and I think, and this is for all of us, if you don't get a role that you think you want to understand A, why, but B, what can you learn from that to make you more successful the next time? So certainly if it's always framed in that light, to say, look, what is it you think I could do? Because I think I've got the potential to be an ed. What more could I do to really make sure I can be successful? I'm sure individuals would always come back with a few thoughts. And quite often, though, shouldn't overanalyze this stuff. Quite often, it's a bit random, you know. When you look at the way these interviews all happen, I'm telling recruiters banks, I should be telling you this, but it's a bit, you know, it's all about right fit, right time, right day, right mood, right everything. Right? There's a lot that goes on in those interview processes. And will they know? They probably won't know for a while if they chose the right one anyway, because you know you never really know until someone really starts. And so I would never take. I mean, you know. Actually, it's quite good not to get your first one, because actually it just shows that, you know, I think all of this not getting everything is actually quite good for you, because it just sort of makes you rethink and reframe where you should go. Rejection is part of a NED journey, by the way.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Joe, could I maybe just add as well to that? Because I think I'm astonished that when I interview more senior people or potentially NEDs to join a page board, is that they haven't thought through more about how they're going to close out the feedback loop at the end of the interview. You know, so it tends to often be quite a low-level, entry-level style question, which is, do you have any feedback for me? Which, you know, the type of question you ask at the end of a graduate interview. I mean, you know, to Ruby's point, you know, think it through. If you're going to want feedback, if feedback's part of your journey to become a NED, you're sat with them, you've been with them for an hour, they're right in front of you. Now's the moment to say what Ruby just said, which is, look, I'm committed to becoming a NED. And therefore, whilst, you know, I'm hoping that this might be the role if it is, but if it isn't, you know, I do want to kind of take this as one step on the journey. So what feedback do you have for me initially, just from today? You know, what's there for me? And please, good and bad, I'm ready for it. I'm not going to jump down your throat, and create a environment that says to the person on the other side of the desk, look, give it to me, because I need the feedback, because there's no point in me going away and then getting to the recruiter, or the feedback going to the recruiter and it being diluted down to a point where it's just not useful, which is, oh, it wasn't about you, it was just that there was a better candidate on the day. I can't do anything with that. So when you've got the person there in front of you, be brave, be uncomfortable, ask the question, and then ask another question, and really get whatever you can in the room, because the people that you'll be interviewing with will be chairs or CEOs or CFOs or whatever, SIDS. I'm sure that they should be comfortable enough in their own role that they can be honest with you there and then.
Can I also add one more point to what Nick said? I think a lot of it's about fit with organisations, and you know when you apply for a role if you're going to really fit. Particularly if you're from a more diverse background, it's amazing how many calls you get about NED roles, okay? And I say to 99% of people, you have got to be joking. There is absolutely no fit between me and that organisation. It may be big, it may be this, it may be that. I don't bring anything to them whatsoever. And I only want a role if I think I'm actually going to add something. And a lot of it's about you being sure you go for the right opportunity and that you feel you can add something. Because when you go for those interviews, it's pretty obvious who can really add something, can improve what a board is doing, as opposed to those that are going just for their first role. Because even going for your first role, if you've got the fit right, and they see you've got some experience they can really use, and that it's complementary to what they've got, you've got a better chance than if you're just somebody looking for your first new role.
Perfect, thank you. Now, I've got 3 questions left. There's more than that, but I've chosen 3. So I'm just warning you that we've got 10 minutes left. So I really want to touch on these and get through them. So as a community, even at a senior level, we are still being underpaid compared to our white colleagues or the market. How do you suggest that we tackle this? And do you feel that reporting on the ethnicity pay gap is necessary to highlight this imbalance? So to both of you, I think that you might have an opinion on that, and it would be lovely if you could share.
Well, maybe I'll kick off. I mean, I think, look, I've always said pay gap reporting matters. So business in the community had, you know, if you've signed up to the Race at Work Charter, it means voluntary ethnicity pay gap reporting, and you're going to explain what you do about it as one of the commitments organisations make. Over 1,000 organisations have signed up to that in the UK now, because many realise that this is the right way to go. What that gives you an opportunity to do is to explain why the pay gaps exist. It also gives you an opportunity to explain what you're going to do about it. I really believe in this area that if organisations don't explain the ethnicity pay gap, I question how serious they are about really, really wanting to change it. Because for me, it's a data point. We found it with the gender pay gap. It isn't actually, and everyone gets into how do you calculate it? It's all too difficult. It's not actually. It's actually really quite easy. And I remember when the gender pay gap came in, there were all these debates about it, but all it does is give you a data point that you can either choose to work with or not, reduce it or not. If organisations reduce it, then you think, oh, actually, and my daughter, my kids were saying to me, they look at this when they think about where they're going to work. My daughter asked, you know, she said to me, oh, I've noticed that organisation's gender pay gap was X. I don't think that's very good. I don't think I'd even want to work there. You know, these things really are beginning to matter, particularly for the you know, the generations coming into the workplace now. So I think it is important. I also think, though, that if you shouldn't feel underpaid for your current role compared to others, because there's equal pay is all in legislation. But if you think there is an unfairness because you've not been promoted and someone else that's your equivalent has, and you haven't been given the same opportunity, then organisations have to give you a way in which to have that dialogue as well. And that's about culture, isn't it? And the leadership of the organisation. And at that point, I'll hand over to Nick.
No, I was just going to pick up on that final point that you mentioned, because I totally agree, because I think sometimes there could be a sense that, well, I haven't got that job because, and then in your own bubble, in your own vacuum, you come up with a reason as to why. And it goes back to probably that point I was making before, which is, you know, force feedback. You know, everybody wants feedback, wants some understanding. And if that makes the person giving it to you feel a little uncomfortable, well, tough. You know, if you've committed your time to either go through a process to get a job and haven't got it, or you've gone through a process to get a promotion and you haven't got it, you deserve to have time committed back to you to find out as to why. And then in relation to what Ruby said at the beginning, I totally agree. If you don't measure it, then it doesn't matter. And you have to have measures in place, and you have to have published measures in place if you're a PLC organisation. So I would agree with Ruby's point completely.
Right, thank you both. So with the executive and non-executive search space being predominantly led by white middle class and upper class professionals, how can they navigate difference and ensure that there is real diversity on their shortlisting processes?
I think it's probably more.
Do you want to start?
Isn't it?
Yeah,
well, I mean, if anyone is in any doubt, I mean, yes, I'm white, but I'm definitely not middle class or upper class. I come from a very working class background, I can assure you. And what Ruby said earlier, if anyone has said to me when I walked through the door at Page, age 23, that I'd be in this job 30 years later, I would have laughed at them, because I was the first person in my family to go to university. And my dad thinks the whole thing's quite comical that I've ended up in this role, and so do I sometimes. So, you know, I've worked hard to get here, and I think that my eye-opener, and I will get to the question because I know we've only got a certain amount of time, but we started a reverse mentoring program in our organisations, and I spent probably the first 10 or 15 years of my career assuming that I'd had no privilege, because I'd come from a working class background in the north of England, and I just thought I went to state school, first in my family to go to uni. I never had any privilege. And when I came to Page, I met people that all been to private school and had trust funds and everything else, and I thought, yeah, that confirms it. And what kind of shook things up for me was 4 or 5 years ago when I was given a reverse mentor who was a black lad who works in our St Albans office, a manager. And we were chatting away about kind of growing up and how he'd grown up. And we're both Arsenal fans. And I was comparing him to my son, who's 19, 20 years of age. And he said, yeah, but I bet your son hasn't been stopped and searched 3 times this year. And suddenly realizing that I had privilege. I hadn't asked for this privilege, but I had it. I had white privilege, I had male privilege, and I'd come from a position where I thought I hadn't had any, and I'd had it all along. And then we got through our conversations into a discussion around, you know, so if I've got this privilege that I didn't know I had, but I do have it, what would you want me to do with it? And he said, well, first thing is that do something with it. You've got it. So, you know, acknowledge you've got it and do something with it and try and do what you can to be an ally for those that don't. So I think it is a recognition of that. As regards organisations with shortlists, it goes back to what I said before, which is that it isn't just the recruiter. I mean, just to be clear, you know, we will, and I said about, you know, I was complimenting you, Joe, on the work you and your team do, is that we challenge organisations to have diversity on their shortlists. And that is something that we really push with them. But again, you know, we are ultimately fishing from a pool of candidates. And, you know, for instance, if I look at technology, I think only 18% of people working in technology in the UK are female. So you might have organisations that are driving for 50-50 in their technology team, but from a pool of candidates, that's only 18% of the workforce in that sector. So, you know, just making sure that you've done enough to have at least some representation on the shortlist. It might not be 5 female candidates, but if it's 1 of 4, then you're trying to drive forward your position. But as I say, you know, we are constantly challenging organisations around this, and, you know, and that's actually what a lot of bigger organisations are using us for, which is helping them with the diversity of their shortlist, which is they might be able to create a shortlist for themselves just through running their own advert. But what they don't then get is the diversity. And we're asked to come in and bring some diversity onto the shortlist. So 1 or 2 extra candidates. So it is going on. It might be brutally slow. It might need to move quicker. But these, I mean, just to reassure you, I mean, these conversations happen every day now, whereas previously, you know, it was, as I said earlier, it was intention. And sorry, the lights go out in my office if I haven't stood by the door after a certain minute. So sorry. But, you know, we've moved from that kind of awareness and intention into action. And I think all organisations are in that space now. So it is getting better. It needs to get better quicker. I get that. I do get that.
With that then, because the final question was, so do you think that these reverse mentoring programs or mentoring in general is important as part of that wider ED&I journey now? Or do you think we have to readdress how we're giving support to underrepresented groups?
Look, I think mentoring is important, but if it's not going to get you a promotion, I'm not sure what the point of it is, to be blunt. You know, I'm sort of, organisations can do lots of mentoring, but if nothing actually happens to your career, it seems a bit of a waste of time. You can tell we're getting to the end of the hour now because I'm getting even blunt. I mean, honestly,
I was going to say.
I hear so many companies talk about the spin of I'm going to mentor you, we're going to do reverse mentoring, but don't worry about it. In 2 years' time, we're still not going to promote you to do anything different. You know, this is the reality. So you need both. You need really good mentoring. And I really like Nick's reverse mentoring scheme because it's really quite humbling when you do that, because you do think, you know, that you've got your own challenges and you realise others around you see you quite differently, which I think is a positive for you. But I think the point on sponsoring is this is saying, I am going to really, really help you over the next 2 to 3 years develop your career with us. And you today have got position X, but you in the next 3 years are going to do this. I got that to be a CEO. I was a CFO, and my God, I could not see how I could be a CEO. It meant talking to lots of people, and I was quite happy being a CFO. I then had to go through a process to be a COO. I then got appointed to be a CEO, but I got huge amounts of support from my board to do that. And that's what I needed to then run a FTSE at the age of 43. And what I'm saying to everybody here is it doesn't come because someone's just great at something. It comes because they've been supported in different roles. And I look at Nick's career. I didn't know you at 23, Nick, but by the time I met you, and then as I watched how the organisation developed you, you also got a huge amount of support to do that. And that comes to all of us. So it's got to be both for me. It's got to be who is going to be the people in the organisation that really back me to get to where I want to, is the biggest thing I would ask all organisations to do for their individuals.
Thank you very much.
And maybe just, Joe, I know we're kind of out of time, but just to add on that whole mentoring thing, I mean, I spoke to you about how personally reverse mentoring meant a lot to me, and it really did. And I've already given that example. But on mentoring, I totally agree with Ruby. It can't be to tick a box. I always say to anyone that I'm mentoring, I'm definitely mentoring from the perspective of we're mentoring you to get you to be in a position to get a job. And I always say the same thing at the beginning, which is that your mentor should be your biggest fan and your harshest critic, and should tell you things that no one else is willing to tell you. Because if you are on that journey to get a promotion, now's the time to kind of dial up the good stuff, but be aware of what the bad stuff is. And frankly, don't come into a mentoring relationship if you're not ready for that honesty, because that's what good mentoring should be.
Great.
Brilliant answers. Thank you so much. And I'm just going to say, lots of positive feedback in the chat. People have really enjoyed this session. So thank you so much for your time. Back to Aaran.
Well, I just basically wanted to thank you all again, because again, love the honesty, the candor, whether or not it's getting further into it with the 55 minutes gone, Ruby, where you get even more honest. I really enjoyed it. And there's some fantastic takeaways. And, you know, a few of them, for example, the relentless networking you talk about, Nick, having the internal champions, the internal confidence. I think it's been really, really helpful and useful. So thank you both very much for your time.
You're welcome.
Right.
Thank you. It's been really good actually. It's been great to reconnect with Paige on for this event, and I will certainly wish everyone on the call the best with their careers. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, here.
Thank you everyone for joining us. See you next time. Bye.
Cheers. Joe, thanks, Aaran.
Bye.